I am Max Keiser, and this is the Keiser Report. Once again, coming to you from Cairo, Egypt. The global insurrection against banker occupation continues. Multifaceted conflict between oligarchs and bankers versus the people in cities from Cairo to Ohio. And of course, silver is skyrocketing because that's the currency of the revolution. As silver prices go higher, JP Morgan stock goes lower, and that entire franchise is threatened with extinction as the price of silver crushes the silver shorts because of you buying silver out there in the millions and millions of ounces, 1 ounce at a time. Let's bring in Stacy Herbert. Stacy.
Another thing driving silver higher, of course, Max, is the day of rage happening in Saudi Arabia, the continuing revolution in Egypt. We were here for Tahrir Square. We went through there, and just so you could see from these images that it was a very friendly, festive atmosphere. It felt very safe. We were only one of the two Westerners in the square.
Well, again, the narrative is completely busted. What we're told through Western media, principally Murdoch and Fox News, that there's an anti-American sentiment here, which there absolutely is not. There's a desire to be free from the yoke of tyranny, and that's the same whether it's in Wisconsin or Cairo. You've got corrupt bankers who are destroying the global economy, and people want to get out. Well,
you mentioned tyranny, and the financial system, as we're linking all these revolutions across the Arab world, revolutions in Wisconsin, to the banking system. I want you to take a look at this interview from Bloomberg Television this past week. And this is Larry Fink, who heads BlackRock. It's a $3.5 trillion fund. And so look what he thinks about what's going on throughout the Arab world.
I want to ask you for a big picture question to start off with. If you look around the world, what do we see, right? Global wave of social unrest. Democratization of information, it plays a big role in that. Twitter, Facebook, $100 oil, the deepening deficit, the states moving to fight public employee unions, imbalances, currency issues, the lingering crisis in Europe. What does it all add up to?
Confusion, uncertainty. Markets don't like uncertainty. Markets like actually totalitarian governments where you have a understanding of what's out there, and obviously the whole dimension is changing now with, as you said, a democratization of countries, and democracies are very messy, as we know in the United States. You have opinions changing back and forth.
Well, yeah, there's Larry Fink. He's at BlackRock, which of course is a subsidized entity by the U.S. government, and the U.S. taxpayer bailed out all the players of BlackRock and their yacht payments. They're not competitive in the sense that they work for a living. They just steal. They're larcenistic. They're tyrants. And he's just plowing people over with impunity because he knows they own all the judges. They own the legal system. And he can just beat, rape, and kill people in public without any recourse whatsoever from any legal entity whatsoever. And that's a kleptocracy. And it's the same in America as it is in Tunisia, the same as Cairo, the same in Wisconsin. Everyone needs to revolt against what guys like Larry Fink. Larry Fink, 200 years ago, would be marching toward the Place de Concorde on his way to the guillotine, and rightfully so.
But this is the sort of mentality, Max, that we're seeing throughout there. They're trying to squash these revolutions. They don't want people to be free because they prefer totalitarianism. So to Americans who think they are free, these are the same guys that control your economy. Do you think they really are allowing you to be democratic and free? I think not.
Yeah, the key phrase is there. He says that Americans prefer totalitarianism.
He says markets prefer totalitarianism, and America claims it's a market economy. When these men refer to markets, this is what they're referring to, not free markets as the theory goes.
And that's what's great about the price of silver, is that it has been monopolized by people who have been manipulating the price in the futures markets and on the COMEX. And the reason it's going higher now is because people are breaking free from the chains of the Larry Fink's style totalitarian monopolization, and it'll go to $300, $400, $500, and these guys like Larry Fink will go out of business.
So let's look at another headline showing that bankers prefer dictatorships. Revealed Blair's secret calls to Gaddafi. It turns out that Tony Blair has always said he never had any commercial relationship with anyone in the Gaddafi family or the Libyan government. But since leaving office, he is understood to have traveled to Tripoli on business for the U.S. bank JP Morgan Chase.
Well, he lies. Tony Blair, of course, lies. He lied to lead up to the Iraq war. They lied. They cooked up the intelligence. Colin Powell shook that little vial of talcum powder and said we got to go kill 1 million Iraqis. Blair was part of that. He's got blood on his hands. He's part of the kleptocracy of JP Morgan. He kills people for money, for blood. And he and Larry Fink are in the same kind of corrupt boat.
Okay, and he works for JP Morgan Chase. The day he got out of office at 10 Downing Street, he jumped into JP Morgan Chase. They hired him for $2 million per year.
But which came first, the chicken or the egg? Was Blair working for JP Morgan before he left 10 Downing Street or after he left 10 Downing Street? And that question applies to Barack Obama. Is he working for JP Morgan now, or is he going to take his job when he leaves the White House? And he doesn't even want to stay for a second term because he'd rather jump right in there and work with JP Morgan and Tony Blair and cash out. The White House is just a resume burnishing exercise for Obama. He's working for JP Morgan right now. Scott Walker at Wisconsin governor, he's working for the Koch brothers right now. He's at Tyrant right now. They're working right now with the enemy. They're selling the people out all over the world. And this is intolerable. And the people in Cairo have the gonads to stand up to it. The people in Wisconsin, Ohio, Illinois are still, wondering, gee, should we do what Larry Fink says? Should we live in a concentration camp for Larry Fink? Should we live in a reservation for Larry Fink? They don't know. What's their problem?
So speaking of Tony Blair, I have a headline here with a Tony Blair kind of guy, somebody who would fit in right in Connaught Square where all the other arms dealers and mass murderers of the world live and hide their wealth from their own nations. The man who plowed into a group of bikers is a Brazilian central banker, and he's charged with attempted murder. So you see this video here, Max. This is a critical mass demonstration in Porto Alegre, Brazil. And as you see that car barreling through the population of bicyclists there and knocking over 8 or 9 of them, well, that's a central banker named Richard Nice. Again, just plowing people over with impunity. Another banker terrorist. The search for the terrorism should be a simple one. Go down to Wall Street, to the offices of Goldman and Morgan, go to the City of London in London, and start arresting people. The fact that you don't, Barack Obama and the rest of you guys, means that you are terrorists, effectively. You support terrorism. You're stealing all the money. You're asking people to live with austerity measures to pay for your bonuses. How is that different than Pol Pot or Stalin or Hitler? It's not. It's the same freaking thing. Well, this man is in psychiatric care.
And that qualifies him to be a money manager.
Well, yes, and his excuse was, I'm in a hurry.
Well, yes, he's in a hurry to defraud people, as that's why the people are in the streets. Well, let's move on, because these guys' days are numbered. As silver continues to go higher, they don't own any silver. These central bankers don't own any gold. They don't own any silver. They're going to be buying at $300, $400, $500 an ounce. Where are they going to be buying it from? Us. Because we're going to be ruling the global economy. We'll have all the silver. They're going to be trying to live on fiat currency and buying a loaf of bread for $5 trillion, which was the exchange rate during the Weimar Republic. If you remember, went from 1 to 5 trillion to 1. And this is where we're headed because these guys are essentially pathological liars and crooks.
Well, speaking of pathological liars and crooks, the state security apparatus here in Egypt, there are 500,000 policemen who operated on behalf of Mubarak and his cronies and American cronies, plundering and defrauding and torturing the population. Here's a tweet from WikiLeaks: Bastille Day in Egypt as storms Secret Service. So we've been here while they've been storming the state security buildings and headquarters throughout Cairo and Alexandria and other locations. The state security apparatus has been busy shredding paper, trying to hide the evidence. And it looks very similar to scenes post-World War II, Nazi Germany. They also tried to hide all their evidence of crimes against humanity. And you see that going on now in Egypt.
Or Enron.
Exactly. That's exactly. Those are my thoughts exactly, Max.
Well, I mean, it's clear it's war crimes. I mean, Blair has committed war crimes on a number of different levels. And Murdoch, his little stepchild, has been assisting him, and that guy, how he survives. He lost $25 billion on his Wall Street Journal investment. He lost billions on his MySpace investment. If it wasn't for guaranteed state monopolies, Burbank, what's his name, Murdoch, would be selling hot dogs at Shea Stadium.
Well, and you mentioned the Koch brothers' involvement with the governor, Scott Walker of Wisconsin. Anonymous actively probing Koch brothers' corporate networks. So in a statement, Anonymous accuses the Koch brothers of fabricating grassroots organizations and advertising campaigns to sway voters based on their falsehoods. The statement concludes, Anonymous hears the voice of the downtrodden American people whose rights and liberties are being systematically removed one by one, even when their own government refuses to listen or worse, is complicit in these attacks.
Well, Anonymous is filling in for the rule of law, which is absent in America.
Well, exactly. So they have the same ability in the virtual space to do what the Egyptians are now doing, storming the state security buildings and headquarters and having to get the physical pieces of paper and videotapes of movie stars, apparently, and powerful people from the Gulf and other regions. They have videotapes of them in compromising positions. And so now Anonymous can do this via just virtually go into database and servers.
Well, that's what the amazing part of this global insurrection against banker occupation is, that multiplicity of levels that it occupies simultaneously. You've got the virtual level, you've got the analog or physical level, you've got people in the streets, you've got Anonymous working anonymously in cyberspace, you've got groups like UK Uncut and Uncut in other cities around the world pushing back against the occupation of bankers. And it's all working, dovetailing together. And this is the war, as we've been talking about for years now. The ultimate distinction, the dividing line in this war is savers versus speculators. I'm not going to get into that right now, but keep that in mind for future shows. Yes, continue, please.
And then finally, Max, I have this headline: "This is a revolution, not a football match." And Max, this is referring to the protests out in Tahrir Square. And in China, they banned all Google searches for Egypt or Tahrir Square. And yet, however, within days, they were making all of these available in Tahrir Square, all the various knickknacks for sale. This is showing Christian and Muslim together, united.
Yeah. Well, it's a dangerous game China is playing. They're trying to cash in on revolutions in Egypt while simultaneously oppressing their own people. That sounds like an unsustainable arbitrage of bad faith over there in China. You might want to decide what side you want to be on, or get squeezed in the middle and forever hold your eggwang.
Yeah, but you also have to ask why the Egyptians weren't just making them themselves, why they weren't making these T-shirts and freedom pendants and flags and all the stuff that were available in Tahrir Square when we were there, why they weren't making them themselves, why they were bringing them in from China.
Because it got underbid by the Chinese, who are everywhere in Africa, all over the world, making business everywhere, but supporting human rights abuses at home. And this is the model that, of course, America wants to emulate. They want the casino gulag model, as we see in China, and they don't want freedom as we see in Cairo. And China's trying to straddle the two, and the people are now going to decide which way they want to go. And I think, judging by my interactions with the folks here in Cairo, the mood right now is to go toward open, free, democratic, kind of almost like a summer of love type of thing. It's all getting jiggy right here in Cairo. Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away, coming away much more, so stay there. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Joining me now in the studio, Lena Atala. Lena is managing editor of Al Masri Al Urim English. Am I saying that correctly?
That's right.
Welcome to the Keiser Report.
Welcome. Thank you.
All right, Lena, tell us about the January 25th revolution here in Cairo. What ignited the revolution?
I do not like to name certain events in the vicinity of January 25th to say that this is certainly what ignited it, because I think that the lead up to January 25th goes back to as far as the early 2000s, when was a series of protests and street politics that were moved by a lot of things, both on the regional level and the domestic level. So we've got the 2003 anti-war demonstrations, we've got the 2005 first domestic demonstrations that go out to the street and say, down with Mubarak. And then you've got a lot of independent things happening, such as the labor protests. You've got also the movements such as the judges' independent movement. And then January 25th happens. There could be things that sparked the massive outbreak of protests and, you know, the mobilization on January 25th, such as the inspiration was the Tunisia revolution, which is next door, such as the increasing awareness about police brutality.
Okay, so the pot was boiling, was simmering for years.
Exactly.
Plus this awareness of the police brutality, and you mentioned this word awareness, and of course what was happening in Tunisia was kicked off in large extent to revelations that were made via WikiLeaks. Mm-hmm. Were you aware of those WikiLeaks revelations, and is that part of the equation?
Yeah, I mean, we're all aware of them by virtue of being journalists. They took a lot of our attention, although they weren't a matter of a lot of public attention, to be honest with you. They were great material for journalists, but they didn't have much to reveal in terms of things that we didn't know. They acted more as corroborative evidence to things that we already knew.
In Egypt, of course, journalists are not free before this revolution. So anyone who hears something coming from a journalist would have to assume it's coming from the state. So there's not wide dissemination of this information, whereas WikiLeaks is an independent source that seemed to there verify. So it helped you to get your message out because you had a third-party verification, more or less, with this huge internet audience. Is that a fair statement to make?
About WikiLeaks, yes. It's just what's disputed or what's contested is the effect this had on people. Because at this point, you don't need anymore to wait for the state to give you the information. The practice speaks for itself on the state.
All right, let's go back to the precedents, events that happened. The April 6th youth movement, who are they? How do they harness the power to organize themselves? Tell us about that, because that seems to be a key event in the history of this.
Definitely. April 6th is a group that is predominantly led and run by young people, young activists, people who've been involved in street politics even before 2008. However, in 2008, in the 6th of April of 2008, they made a call for civil disobedience, and that was a call in solidarity with a thriving labor movement in the Delta city of Mahalla, which happened to host one of the biggest weaving factories in the country, and which happened to be a site of labor activism for years, and for decades in fact. So the April 6th movement launched a call through a Facebook group for a civil disobedience day, and the Facebook group happened to draw a lot of attention from different people. Now, not all those who signed on the group saying that they will, be striking on that day back in 2008 did do it. However, the call made some resonance in terms of, calling people out of their apathy and making them feel that there is a possibility for an alternative political reality.
What about the role of women overall in this revolution? It seems, when I'm on the streets here in Cairo, many women, I'd say, almost half of the people on the street are women. You see a lot of families. During the Tahrir Square Friday gathering, it's almost a carnival-like festive family outing. People are there to celebrate already the anniversary of their liberation. And so the role of women in the revolution, how do you see that?
Well, I think the role of women transcends that of festivities on Fridays. I think women had a very central role in this revolution since its early days, even in its most difficult days. They were out on the streets, both on the square, but in other areas in Egypt that were very active in this revolution. They were side by side with the men, inhaling tear gas and being out there under the police attack in the first days of the revolution, but also supporting the continuation of this revolution by sleeping out on the square, by sometimes compromising their security, just as the men did, although I think the sense of vulnerability was higher amongst women. However, they compromised all that and were on the street since day one throughout the whole revolution. So it was quite inspiring.
A lot of people say that actually women started this revolution. What's wrong with that statement?
Again, I can't point at one group of people anyways, regardless of the gender or the religion or whatever, and say they started. So that would be a bunch of young people started this revolution with all the broadness that this statement carries. So I would say that. Okay.
In the past few days, we've seen protesters storming the state security buildings. Tell us about this. What was the role of state security in the Mubarak dictatorship? Of course, as an American, we're aware of this as the destination for the extraordinary rendition flights that come out of Guantanamo Bay and even out of the streets of America. They end up in these torture cells in these areas. Tell us about what these are and what's going on there.
Yeah, exactly. It's the local version of something that a Western democracy cannot handle. So it is, they are laboratories of torture,
So the U.S. outsources their torture to this site.
Exactly.
And there's a few of them in Egypt. There's one right here in Cairo.
Yeah, there are two big ones in Cairo, but plenty of affiliate centers, state security centers around the country, throughout the country.
So when Americans say we don't torture, they mean we outsource our torture.
Exactly.
The same way as they say they outsource their manufacturing to China, they outsource their torture to Egypt.
Yeah.
Tony Blair and the rest of the gang seems to really be exposed in this revolution, especially in Libya, as being one of the architects of some of these war crimes.
Yeah.
Now, we've been looking at footage of protesters gathering all the evidence, all the paperwork, looking at this stuff. Have you found anything juicy, any evidence of anything?
I don't think the documents that were found yesterday, I was there yesterday, I don't think the documents we found yesterday were particularly revealing in as much as they were personal files of activists, of journalists, but it's another WikiLeaks moment whereby you know all of this stuff, but you now have a corroborative evidence that those people have files for every single person. They have very long transcriptions of phone conversations between activists. So it makes you feel like they had a lot of resources and a lot of money, and that they lived off a lot of fear in order to waste all their time, transcribing 1 hour long phone conversations between activists that say it's really nothing. If it tells us anything, it tells us the fragility of the regime that was just talked about.
So it's like when the Berlin Wall came down and they went into the Stasi and they found all the files.
Yeah.
And this is America, Egyptian Stasi, basically. And of course, America is doing the same thing in the U.S. now with American citizens, which is sad. Okay, let's touch on Mubarak here for a second. His billions of dollars. Any idea where they are? Is there any hope of getting them back?
Well, I wish I knew where they are. I would have been the best journalist in this country. But as of now, I can tell that at least there is a vested interest from the judiciary to pursue a proper court case in order to investigate potential corruption of the ruling family. We hope that the cash comes back and that there is a redistribution of wealth at some point, but it's quite unclear at this point how long this process will take and how easy it would be given the extensive network of power that this president has groomed for over 30 years.
Now, finally, the mainstream U.S. media paints the revolution in Egypt as one of radical Islamicists and anti-American fervor. Now, I've been in the streets here for several days, and I've experienced the exact opposite. People are like, "Oh, you're from America. I love America." I mean, it seems. First of all, I guess my first question is: don't people in the streets realize that loving America maybe is not a great idea, considering that America propped up Mubarak? I mean, do they make the connection there?
I don't think there was much worrying about American. It wasn't about anti-American or pro-American sentiments at this point. It was about a very pure domestic condition that people had a collective dream about changing. Whether the American media cannot step up to how progressive this revolution was in portraying it, then it becomes their own problem. But this is a very progressive revolution, I can assure you.
Well, I remember one of the first stops Barack Obama made when he became president was he made a grand speech here in Cairo, promised a lot of things, and then reneged on all those promises. But Obama, is he still held with some esteem here, or do people kind of now figured out that he's just a banker puppet?
Well, I think the recent policies which were basically lining up with the Topel regime were not particularly received with a lot of acceptance from people here. But at this point, people again are making their own reality and are forcing the U.S. administration to respond accordingly. So I don't think it matters anymore what Obama's policy is. He really needs to react to what's happening. I guess the ball is in his court at this point.
Right, that's the thing, isn't it? He's reacting, he's behind the curve, he seems lost, and unfortunately he doesn't seem to have any vision or idea of what might be a good future for this country or this region outside of the interests of his bankers who kind of keep him in his office. You know, he's kind of their pet. But now going forward, a year from now, 2 years from now, what's your best case scenario for Cairo, Egypt?
They're changing the logic of the constitution.
What do you mean by changing the logic?
changing the political culture that has been extremely patriarchal as of the 1952 military coup in this country. What this practically means is basically removing all the power concentration in the figure of the president and recreating governance in the form of three powers that are completely separate from each other: an executive, legislative, and
Sounds familiar.
yeah, I'm sure. Sounds ideal as well, but it's quite possible at this point. So.
Yeah, it is possible as long as you don't let special interests come in and destroy that delicate checks and balances and balance of power. Okay, Lena Atala, that's going to do it. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Lena Atala. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, bye, y'all.